Some cities raised temples, others empires, all left behind a mark that time could not erase. Tonight we will journey through 20 places where the ancient world breathed with great force. Some still live on, others hid among ruins. But all somehow still speak to us. Babylon, the splendor of the gardens and the silence of the tower. On the vast Mesopotamian plain, where the Tigris and Euphrates wound their way like veins of clay and life, once rose a city so majestic, so boundless in its ambition and mystery, that its name still echoes through the collective imagination with a mix of admiration, fear, and fascination. Babylon, more than a word, it is an echo, a symbol that cuts across the centuries like an unfinished promise, a warning, and a myth woven of baked brick and bronze. There, in the heart of what is now Iraq, flourished one of the most advanced, complex, and magnetic centers of the ancient world. And yet, only ruins remain, timidly peeking through the sand, as if the city itself had chosen to fall silent after having said everything. One of its greatest enigmas, and also one of its most celebrated images, is the famed Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Legend has it they were built by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, who longed for the green mountains of her homeland. In a region dominated by dust, dry heat, and the hue of clay, the gardens were a green anomaly, a feat of love and power at once. Terrace upon terrace, plant upon plant, trees and waterfalls ascending toward the sky as though nature had been tamed to imitate paradise. Even today, historians debate whether they truly existed, whether they stood in Babylon or perhaps in Nineveh, or whether they were more legend than reality. But perhaps that matters less, because the Hanging Gardens live primarily in humanity's memory, in that corner of the mind where desire and beauty embrace impossibility. Beyond the lush vegetation that may never have existed, Babylon was, above all, a city of towers, of ziggurats, of temples that pierced the sky with the ambition of drawing nearer to the gods. Among all those mythical structures, one stands out that, despite never being physically uncovered, has fueled the imaginations of generations: the Tower of Babel. According to the biblical account, men, drunk on their building prowess, decided to erect a tower reaching to heaven. God, angered by their arrogance, scattered humanity and confused their tongues. Babel became synonymous with confusion, with the breaking of unity. But beyond the myth, the truth is that in Babylon there existed an imposing structure known as Etemenanke, a 7-tiered step tower dedicated to the god Marduk. It soared approximately 90 meters high, its summit touching the city's sky as a declaration of both spiritual and earthly power. The Tower of Babel, as a symbol, is far more than a religious tale. It is the eternal image of human ambition, of its drive to transcend the material through the material itself. Babylon was undoubtedly an imperial capital, but also a spiritual center, a nexus of knowledge and belief that overflowed the boundaries of its era. Their religion was not simply a cultural practice but the very architecture of the world. The god Marduk presided over both the heavens and the structure of power. The king, as in so many ancient civilizations, ruled not in his own name, but as the divine's representative. The city's layout was drawn in sacred geometry. Its walls, especially the imposing Ishtar Gate, were covered with reliefs of bulls, lions, and mythological dragons. Art and engineering merged into a language speaking of eternity, cosmic order, and the necessity of harmony between the human and the celestial. Priests, scribes, and Babylonian astronomers labored side by side to decipher the rhythms of the universe. It is said they were the ones who divided the day into 24 hours, the circle into 360 degrees, and who recorded eclipses and celestial movements with astonishing precision. Babylon was not merely a symbol of splendor. It was a place where knowledge was treasured as a divine gift, where heaven and earth were understood as parts of a single tapestry. Each star had a name, each number a vibration, each rite a resonance in the beyond. And yet, every greatness meets its dusk sooner or later. Babylon was no exception. Despite its strength, its formidable walls, and its spiritual power, the city fell to Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire in 539 BC. The conquest was surprisingly peaceful, almost unresisted. There was no bloodshed or fire, only a shift of power that seemed, at first, little more than a whisper. But that whisper marked the beginning of the silence. Babylon was gradually stripped of its centrality, of its political and spiritual soul. Over time, its name became a symbol of decadence, of arrogance punished, of power corrupted. The very name that once meant splendor came to stand for excess and confusion. The following centuries set about erasing its details. Sand and neglect did their work. When Alexander the Great arrived at the city, it was no longer the same. He sought to make it the capital of his new empire, dreamed of restoring it, but died before he could achieve his vision. Babylon, like so many cities that have brushed the absolute, was condemned to be remembered rather than inhabited. Its memory weighs heavier than its ruins. Its gardens are greener in the imagination than in any archaeological plan. Its tower stands taller in myth than in any reconstruction. There are cities that are not explained solely by what they were in terms of stone or power, but by what they sparked in the human mind. Babylon is one of them. A real place, yes, but also a symbol. A mirror in which humanity gazes to ask itself what it means to build, to dominate, to ascend, and also to fall. A whisper that still travels among the grains of desert sand, among clay tablets and the stories we tell ourselves as we fall asleep. Memphis, the forgotten heart of pharaonic Egypt. Before Thebes became synonymous with splendor, before Luxor gleamed with its eternal columns and colossal temples, before even the Valley of the Kings held its silent secrets of the hereafter, there breathed a city that housed the very soul of ancient Egypt. That city was Memphis, and it was far more than an administrative capital. It was a heartbeat that echoed for centuries at the center of the known world, a crossroads where the human and the divine fused into an architecture of stone, order, and eternity. Memphis was born, according to ancient Egyptian belief, from the word and the desire of the gods. It is said to have been founded by Menes, the first pharaoh to unite Upper and Lower Egypt. This was not merely a political or strategic decision. It was an act of creation, an imposition of order on chaos. The chosen site was no accident. Where the Nile Delta begins to open, where its waters split and fertilize the land, Memphis rose as the fulcrum between the two crowns, a living symbol of the nation's unity. For more than 1,000 years, it stood as the seat of royal power. The earliest pharaohs built palaces on its fertile soil, raised temples to honor the gods who protected them, and turned its streets and squares into centers of thought, worship, and governance. Memphis lacked the later monumentality of Thebes, the magical theater of Amarna, or the shadowy mystery of subterranean desert tombs. But what it possessed was centrality, presence, permanence. It was the gravitational core of the land, where time was measured, the Nile's rise monitored, and the destiny of a civilization obsessed with eternity decided. Yet if anything defined Memphis spiritually, it was the figure of Ptah, the silent, wise creator god, patron of artisans and architects, those who shaped the world through matter. Unlike louder or more combative deities, Ptah created with word and will. He was a god of the invisible, of thought made manifest. In his temple, the great Hwt, it was believed the energy sustaining the universe rested. That temple was so revered that the Greeks derived the very name Egypt from it. Hwt, House of the Ka of Ptah, evolving over time into Aegyptos. The cult of Ptah was not simply religious practice. It was a philosophy of life. In Memphis, knowledge and devotion walked hand in hand. Memphite priests were famed for their wisdom, their ability to read the signs of the sky and the intentions of the beyond. There, some of the world's oldest theological texts were composed, like the so-called Memphite theology, which describes creation not as war or magic, but as articulated thought, as a word made flesh. In that light, the entire city was a perpetual offering. Its walls, statues, courtyards, and obelisks were not mere decoration but petrified prayers. And yet, of that sacred, imperial, and wise Memphis almost nothing remains today. Only scattered ruins lie on the outskirts of Cairo, among palm trees, dirt tracks, and a silence that feels detached from history's roar. The fragments of Ptah's temple, A fallen colossus of Ramses II toppled on its back as if time itself had conquered it. Patches of wall, shattered statues, inscriptions blurred by wind and sun. There are no grand avenues of sphinxes, no mountain-like temples, no museums guarding its treasures. And that is what astonishes most. A city that pulsed as the world's center for over a millennium now occupies barely a corner of memory. How does something so monumental fade away? What causes a city that symbolized power and wisdom to vanish from collective imagination, while others, newer or less influential, remain vivid? Perhaps the answer lies in the shifting of power, in the inevitable ebb and flow of civilizations moving their centers as the sun moves across the sky. When the Middle Kingdom pharaohs chose to shift their capital southward to Thebes, Memphis began its slow dimming. It was not a sudden abandonment but an almost imperceptible decline, as if the city itself resigned to its new condition of shadow. And yet, it lived on for centuries. Even in the Roman era, Memphis was still inhabited, though no longer dictating the empire's rhythm. It was a gradual twilight, perhaps more sorrowful than violent destruction, because what disappears without noise is more easily forgotten. When Arab travelers reached Egypt, they described Memphis as a field of melancholy ruins, overtaken by vegetation and silence. Nothing of its ancient grandeur remained but legend, the faint vibration of what once was. Today, wandering those flat plains where Egypt's greatest city once flourished, it is easy to feel accompanied by a void full of echoes, as if the stones whisper of slumbering gods, of priests no longer chanting their prayers, of sculptors whose names have been erased by sand. Memphis need not stand to be remembered. Its legacy is not marble or gold, but ideas, a worldview where the visible and the invisible are woven into the same fabric. Remembering it is an act of justice to the past. Not all cities that shaped history left footprints easy to trace. Some, like Memphis, chose mystery, the elegance of fading away, abstaining from competing with stone giants and engaging rather in the subtlety of thought and word. And therein lies its strength, as the forgotten, yet never lost, heart of pharaonic Egypt. Nineveh, the last flame of Assyria, north of what we now call Iraq, beside the winding Tigris River, lies the majestic shadow of a city that in its day was the most feared, admired, and complex face of the ancient world. Nineveh, capital of the final great splendor of the Assyrian Empire, was no ordinary city. It was a declaration of power, a conquest machine, a jewel of art and wisdom, a paradox between brutality and sophistication. It was, without embellishment, the last great flame of a civilization that burned with intensity before fading forever. Few cities have embodied an empire's pulse as clearly as Nineveh did. Under the reign of Ashurbanipal, its most celebrated monarch, the city not only reached its greatest territorial expansion, but also attained a level of organization and refinement that debunked the cliché of the Assyrians as mere bloodthirsty warriors. Yes, Nineveh was harsh, relentless, and fierce in its military campaigns. Yet it was also a center of thought, a place where knowledge was gathered, catalogued, translated, and elevated into an art form. The palace of Ashurbanipal was more than a royal residence. It was a city within the city, a complex of halls, courtyards, corridors, and archive rooms reflecting both the glory of Assyria and its obsession with order, control, and memory. But among all its marvels, one stands out for its symbolic and cultural impact: the Library of Ashurbanipal. Comprised of thousands of clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform, it contained religious texts, historical chronicles, scientific treatises, magical incantations, and literary works. There were versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh, treatises on astrology, Sumerian hymns, and administrative records that today allow us to peer into an ancient, complex, and deeply structured worldview. That library was simultaneously an act of preservation and a demonstration of power. To possess the written word was to hold the key to the universe, and Ashurbanipal knew it well. His pride as a collector of knowledge rivaled his pride as a conqueror. In his inscriptions, he presents himself as the only king who knew how to read and write, as the protector of sacred texts, as the heir not only of empires but of ideas. that made Nineveh not only a political capital but a cultural beacon, a living encyclopedia carved in stone and clay. Yet despite its lofty heights, or perhaps because of them, the city became a target of resentment, fear, and prophecy. Biblical texts portray it as a symbol of sin and excess, a city destined for punishment. The prophet Nahum predicted its ruin with poetic and terrifying precision. And the story of Jonah, sent to Nineveh to warn of its destruction, echoes that ambivalence between condemnation and redemption. In those writings, Nineveh is more than a city. It is an archetype of corrupt empire, of power without mercy, of splendor that becomes its own trap. That perception intensified over time, especially because its fall was so total that for centuries its very existence was doubted. In the year 612 before Christ, a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and other peoples united to besiege Nineveh. The assault was not merely military but a historic vengeance. Walls were brought down, temples were looted, gates were set aflame. The waters of the Tigris, it is said, helped breach the outer defenses during a flood. The city was razed with such ferocity that it vanished from maps for more than 2,000 years. Its memory dissolved in the desert until 19th-century archaeologists like Austin Henry Layard began excavations at the Kuyunjik Mounds and rediscovered its ruins. Ironically, despite its institutionalized violence, Nineveh was also a place of art. The reliefs adorning its palaces are works of contained yet fierce beauty, where soldiers, lions, winged deities, and battle scenes coexist with astonishing technical precision. In them, every muscle, every gesture, every fold of skin seems to cry out a mixture of domination and elegance. They are images of war, yes, but also of refined aesthetics. For the Assyrians, depicting conquest was a way to prolong it into eternity. Thus Nineveh found itself caught between extremes, between admiration for its culture and horror at its cruelty, between the refinement of its library and the brutality of its campaigns, between veneration and condemnation. That tension is perhaps what makes it so fascinating, because it was not simply a place, but a mirror in which humanity could see both its genius and its brutality. Today, the ruins of Nineveh can still be visited, though with difficulty, on the outskirts of Mosul. Its location has placed it once again at the crossroads of modern conflicts. It has suffered damage, looting, and neglect. Yet, as with every city laden with meaning, its essence endures. In every rescued tablet, in every fragment of relief, in every barely deciphered inscription, Nineveh continues to speak, though it does so from the dust. And in that fragmented voice, that archaeological whisper, lie the warning, the memory, and the lesson. Because some cities rule by army and others by ideas, Nineveh strove to rule by both, and in that ambition it found both its glory and its final destiny. It was flame, it was empire, it was library, and now it is silence heavy with memory. Tiwanaku, La Ciudad del Sol Silencioso. Amas de 3.800 metros sobre el nivel del mar. Donde el aire se vuelve delgado y el horizonte parece flotar entre nubes. Se encuentra un lugar que desafía la lógica, la cronología y hasta la memoria. Ali, sobre la vasta meseta del altiplano andino, cerca del lago Titicaca, duerme una ciudad de piedra que no ruge ni canta, pero que susurra con la voz de los siglos. Tiwanaku, o Tiwanaku, como prefieren decir quienes lo sienten más que lo estudian. No es simplemente un conjunto de ruinas. Es un enigma abierto, una grita en la narrativa convencional del tiempo. Los viajeros que llegan hasta allí, envueltos por el viento y el frío de las alturas, suelen detenerse en silencio ante sus muros. No por respeto obligado, sino por una extraña sensación de pequeñez. Porque lo que se ve en Tiwanaku no parece pertenecer al mundo tal como lo conocemos. Grandes bloques de piedra andesita y arenisca, perfectamente cortados, encajados en argamasa con precisión milimétrica, alineados con patrones que en hoy desconciertan a ingenieros, escaleras taladas en una sola pieza de roca, puertas que no conducen a ninguna parte visible, plataformas inmensas formadas por monolitos que pesan decenas de toneladas. Y to do ello, a esa altitud extrema, donde no hay árboles para rodillos, and I minus cercanas que justifican el origen de tantas toneladas de material. Mucho se radica sobre la supuesta arquitectura imposible de Tiahuanaco. Hay quienes afirman que sus constructores poseían un conocimiento avanzado de geometría, astronomía y física que rivaliza con el de civilizations posteriores. Otros incluso han sugerido teorías más osadas, que hablan de tecnologías perdidas, culturas desconocidas, o incluso influencias no terrestres. Pero más allá del entusiasmo por lo inexplicable, lo que está claro es que los antiguos habitantes del altiplano sabían exactamente lo que hacían. Y lo hacían con un propósito que iba más allá de la utilidad o el abrigo, porque Tiwanaku no fue una ciudad funcional en el sentido moderno. No tenía murallas defensivas, en hay trazado militar, en hay evidencia clara de viviendas masivas. Era, según todas las pistas arqueológicas y simbólicas, un centro ceremonial, espiritual, astronómico, un lugar donde el cielo y la tierra se encontraban, un puente entre dimensiones. El complejo de Calisaya, por ejemplo, se alinea con los solsticios de verano y invierno de manera tan precisa que, hoy serve como observatorio solar. La famosa Puerta del Sol, talada en un solo bloque de piedra y decorada con imágenes del dios Huiracocha, rodado de figuras aladas. Se ha interpretado como un calendario, como un portal, como un mensaje cifrado que no ha perdido su carga mística. Pero quizá lo más desconcertante de Tiwanaku no es su forma, sino su tiempo. Durante décadas, los arqueólogos discutieron su datación. Las estimaciones más conservadoras la ubicaban entre los años 300 y 1000 en nuestra era. Sin embargo, ciertos estudios y teorías, aunque debatidos, han plantado fechas mucho más antiguas. Algunas hipótesis, basadas en alineaciones astronómicas o en dataciones indirectas, situan el origen de Tiwanaku en un periodo que antecede incluso a la civilización egipcia. Si esto fuera cierto, estaríamos ante uno de los asentamientos urbanos más antiguos del planeta, levantado en uno de los lugares más inhóspitos del mundo, y dotado de una arquitectura que aún no comprendemos del todo. Pero incluso si nos quedamos con las fechas más aceptadas, el legado de Tiwanaku es inmenso. Su influencia se extiende por todo el mundo andino preincaico. Los pueblos que la sucedieron heredaron no solo elementos arquitectónicos y religiosos, sino también una forma de entender el tiempo, el espacio y la relación con lo sagrado. Los incas, siglos después, la reverenciaron como lugar de origen de su lineage mítico, y algunos cronistas coloniales relatan que el propio Manco Cápac habría salido de sus ruinas. No es coincidencia que en la cosmovisión andina, los apis, los espíritus de las montañas, y los lugares como Tiwanaku están cargados de una presencia viva. Son más que ruinas. Son entidades, guardians de memorias no escritas. Y, sin embargo, a pesar de su majestuosidad, Tiwanaku sigue siendo un misterio envuelto en silencio. A diferencia de otras civilizaciones que dejaron textos, tumbas o estelas narrativas, aquí la información es fragmentaria, velada. Su lengua original no ha llegado hasta nosotros de manera clara. Lo que sabemos lo deducimos de la piedra, del trazado del sol sobre los muros, de la intuición de los pueblos que hoy veneran ese lugar. Tal vez por eso, cuando uno camina entre sus estructuras, no siente el paso del tiempo como una línea, sino como un círculo. No hay fecha exacta, no hay historia cerrada. Hay en cambio una presencia, una vibración. Tiwanaku no se impone, como lo hacen las grandes urbes imperiales. No amenaza, no seduce con oro ni con sangre. Solo esta, calada, altiva, como si supera que no necesita explicarse. Como si lavara tanto tiempo ali que ya no espera ser comprendida, solo sentida. Y tal vez sac su mayor legado. Recordarnos que hay civilizations que no hablaron con palabras, sino con la piedra, el sol y el silencio. Uruk. El inicio de la escritura y del mito. Mucho antes de que las pirámides se alzaran sobre la arena, antes de que las aguilas romanas cruzaran el Rin o de que los templos griegos dominaran las colinas de mármol. En una vasta llanura donde los ríos Tigris y Euphrates tejían caminos de limo y vida, nació un lugar que lo cambiaría todo. Ese lugar fue Uruk, una ciudad que no solo albergó muros, templos y mercados, sino también una de las mayores revoluciones simbólicas de la humanidad. La escritura. Ali, en ese rincón de la antigua Sumeria, ese comenzó a registrar el pensamiento, a guardar la memoria y a dar forma visible a lo invisible. Uruk fue, en efecto, el escenario donde se incendió por primera vez la chispa del lenguaje escrito, ese acto de codificar el mundo a través de signos. No era en literatura en hipogeia, sino contabilidad, registros de tributo, nombres, cifras, comercio, grano, tablilas de arcilla humida impresas con un punzón triangular. La escritura cuneiforme, un sistema que al principio sirvió para controlar lo práctico, pero que, con el tiempo, se transformaría en vehículo del mito, de la ley, de la religión y del arte. Lo que nació como una herramienta de administración acabó siendo una forma de eternidad. Uruk no solo dio origen a la escritura, sino también el mito más antiguo que ha legado hasta nosotros con cuerpo, con voz, con humanidad, la epopeya de Gilgamesh. En esta ciudad gobernó, según la tradición, ese rey mitad hombre y mitad dios, fuerte como una tormenta y frágil como cualquier mortal. Gilgamesh, el hero civilizador y salvaje a la vez, fue quien mandó construir las murallas de Uruk, quien venció monstruos, quien perdió a su amigo Enkidu y, en su dolor, emprendió el viaje hacia lo desconocido en busca de la inmortalidad. Su historia, escrita en tablitas de arcilla siglos después de su muerte, no es solo un relato épico. Es un espejo de las preguntas más antiguas del alma humana. Gilgamesh camina por Uruk como un símbolo de lo que la civilización permite y también de lo que no puede evitar. La muerte, la pérdida, la duda. Es una figura fundacional no porque lo haya hecho todo bien, sino precisamente porque es equivocó, porque sintió miedo, porque se enfrentó al límite. Y eso es lo que hace de Uruk algo más que un conjunto de ruinas o un sitio arqueológico. Es el lugar donde mito y realidad se abrazaron por primera vez con forma humana. La ciudad en sí fue una proeza de organización y visión. En su apogeo, Uruk era una metrópolis vibrante, con barrios dedicados a la alfarería, al tejido, a la metalurgia, a los rituales sagrados. Sus templos, especialmente el de la diosa enana, deidad del amor, la guerra y el cielo, eran verdaderos centros de actividad política y espiritual. Ali no se separaba lo sagrado de lo cotidiano. Todo estaba impregnado de simbolismo. Cada canal, cada zanja, cada patio tenía un propósito que iba más allá de lo material. Los sacerdotes eran también administradores, los ritos también contratos. La ciudad funcionaba como un organismo, como una extensión del cosmos mismo. Y es que Uruk representa el nacimiento de la ciudad como concepto, no solo como aglomeración de personas. Aquí comienza la historia urbana. No porque fuera la primera agrupación humana con casas, hubo otras anteriores, sino porque fue la primera en estructurar una visión integral del mundo basada en leyes, administración, jerarquía, símbolos, arte, religión y economía. Fue, en cierto modo, el primer rostro de la civilización. Lo que hoy llamamos ciudad, con su lógica de centro, su arquitectura planificada, su identidad compartida, Tienen Uruk uno de sus más antiguos modelos. Sin embargo, el paso del tiempo, como en tantas otras historias antiguas, cubrió a Uruk con el polvo del olvido. Durante siglos, su nombre permaneció dormido, apenas sostenido por leyendas dispersas. No fue hasta el siglo XIX que arqueólogos europeos comenzaron a excavar la región, y se encontraron con los restos de una ciudad que superaba en antigüedad a cualquier otra conocida en ese momento. Las capas de arcilla hablaban en silencio, revelaban templos, murallas, tablillas, utensilios. La Uruk real comenzaba a emerger, y con ella, una nueva conciencia sobre nuestros propios orígenes. Pero más allá de sus descubrimientos arqueológicos, Uruk nos ofrece una lección más profunda. La civilización no nació del hierro y de la espada, sino de la palabra, del símbolo, del deseo de recordar. Lo que hace humana a una sociedad no es solo su capacidad para construir, sino su impulso por narrarse a sí misma, por dejar constancia de su paso, por mirar el cielo y preguntarse por qué. Uruk, al darnos la escritura, no nos dio solo un medio de comunicación. Nos dio el espejo donde reconocernos. Hoy, las ruinas de Uruk, en el sur de Irak, no son tan espectaculares como las pirámides egipcias o las columnas griegas. No tienen el dramatismo de los templos talados en piedra ni la verticalidad de las torres sumerias posteriores. Son más bien una huella baja, una cicatriz antigua en la tierra, con muros erosionados, fragmentos de cerámica, ladrillos cocidos por el sol. Pero eso no les quita importancia. Al contrario, su modestia física contrasta con la magnitud de lo que allí comenzó. Uruk nos recuerda que no todo origen necesita monumentos gigantescos para ser eterno. A veces, basta con una tablilla de arcilla, con un nombre, con un verso, he mirado dentro de mí y no he hallado la vida eterna. Dice Gilgamesh al final de su viaje. Y en esa confesión, talada hace más de 4000 años, on podemos reconocernos. Petra, la ciudad talada por el tiempo, escondida entre los pliegues ardientes del desierto de Jordania, oculta tras gargantas estrechas y paredes de roca que se elevan como muros de un mundo antiguo, reposa Petra, la ciudad que parece haber sido esculpida por la paciencia del tiempo y la devoción de una civilización silenciosa. No fue levantada con el estruendo de martillos ni el rugido de grúas, sino con cincels y silencio, con una delicadeza que transforma la piedra en poma. Petra no se construyó, Petra fue revelada. Talada en las entrañas de montañas rojizas, aparece de pronto al final del sic, ese estrecho desfiladero de más de un kilómetro que se convierte en preludio del asombro. Y cuando se abre el espacio y el viajero ve el tesoro por primera vez, con su fachada esculpida como si los dioses hubieran corrido guardar allí sus secretos más íntimos, entonces se comprende que no es esta ante una simple ciudad, sino ante una declaración de lo imposible. Petra fue la capital del pueblo nebacio, una civilización de comerciantes, astrónomos, arquitectos y ingenieros que dominaron las rutas del incienso y de las especies entre Arabia, Egipto y el Mediterráneo. Un pueblo que no solo supo negociar entre imperios, sino que convirtió el desierto en hogar, y lo que para otros era limit, para ellos fue punto de partida. Fundaron Petra hacia el siglo for antes de nuestra era, y durante varios siglos, la ciudad floreció como una joya escondida en el corazón de las rutas caravaneras. Allí llegaban caravanas cargadas de seda, marfil, perlas, oro, perfumes, textiles. Petra era el cruce donde los caminos del este y del oeste se saludaban, se fundían, y dejaban atrás no solo bienes, sino ideas, idiomas, estilos y creencias. Pero Petra no fue solo centro de comercio. Fue también una maravilla de ingeniería hidráulica. Porque en una region donde el agua es más valiosa que el oro, los negocios crearon un sistema complejo de canales, cisternas, presas y túneles que captaban la escasa lluvia, la almacenaban y la distribuían de manera eficiente durante todo el año. Esa habilidad para dominar el elemento más esquivo del desierto fue clave para la vida de la ciudad, para su agricultura, para su espiritualidad. Petra no solo sobrevivía en el entorno más hostil, Petra florecía. Y lo hacía en piedra y en agua, en simetría y en sombra. La arquitectura de Petra desconcierta y fascina. La ciudad no es eleva, es adentra. Sus templos, tumbas y palacios no es construyen hacia arriba, sino que es excavan hacia dentro. Cada fachada es una obra de arte única, esculpida directamente en la roca viva, con detalles helenísticos, orientales y negocios que conviven en armonía inesperada. El tesoro, tal vez su imagen más famosa, no es un banco ni un almacén de riquezas, sino probablemente una tumba real. Y sin embargo, su nombre ha perdurado como símbolo de algo oculto, algo valioso que yace tras los muros del tiempo. Los colores de Petra cambian con la luz. La piedra, compuesta de capas de arenisca, varía entre tonos de rojo, naranja, rosa, púrpura y dorado, según la hora del día y la estación. Hay momentos, al amanecer o al atardecer, en los que la ciudad parece arder suavemente desde dentro, como si recordara su pasado con una nostalgia cálida. Camina por sus senderos y es como recorrer un sueño en cámara lenta, donde cada paso revela una forma nueva, un grabado olvidado, un vestigio de quienes vivieron y amaron en este lugar hace 2000 años. Y sin embargo, pese a su esplendor, Petra fue olvidada. Tras la anexión del reino negocio al imperio romano, en el año 106 de nuestra era, la ciudad comenzó una lenta declinación. El comercio se desvió hacia nuevas rutas, los terremotos destruyeron parte de sus estructuras, y poco a poco, el eco de su gloria se fue apagando. Cuando el mundo medieval hablaba de cruzadas, de coronas y de catedrals, Petra yacía dormida, oculta en la garganta del desierto, solo conocida por las tribus beduinas que la protegían como un secreto sagrado. No fue hasta principios del siglo XIX, en 1812, que el explorador suizo Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, disfrazado como musulmán para poder ingresar a las regiones cerradas a los europeos, redescubrió Petra, fingiendo devoción para sacrificar una cabra en un lugar santo. Logró que los guías locales lo condujeran hasta allí. Cuando sus ojos vieron el tesoro emergiendo de entre las rocas, comprendió que había encontrado algo que iba más allá de la arqueología. Había despertado una ciudad dormida en el corazón de la piedra. Desde entonces, Petra comenzó a entrar, poco a poco, en la conciencia del mundo moderno. Pero, ¿cómo desaparece una ciudad tan bella? ¿Cómo se borra del mapa un lugar tan extraordinario? Tal vez porque Petra, como toda ciudad marcada por lo sagrado, fue construida también para el misterio. No está a la vista, no se impone en el paisaje, se esconde en él, se protege. Su belleza es una belleza íntima, contenida, que no necesita testigos constantes para existir. Tal vez por eso sobrevivió, tal vez por eso on conmueve, porque lo que es visible pero discreto, majestuoso pero silencioso, no se pierde, simplemente espera. Hoy Petra es patrimonio de la humanidad, maravilla del mundo moderno, símbolo de Jordania, escenario de películas, destino de viajeros de todo el planeta. Pero sigue siendo más que eso. Es un recordatorio de lo que el ser humano puede lograr cuando se alia con la tierra en lugar de conquistarla. Cuando tala en la roca no solo su poder, sino también su fe, su necesidad de belleza, su intuición de lo eterno. Petra no grita, no proclama. Petra susurra. Y en su murmulo de piedra y arena, on ese escucha la voz d'un pueblo que supo vivir entre el comercio y la contemplación, entre lo práctico y lo sublime, entre el agua escondida y la roca ardiente. Una ciudad que no fue levantada, sino esculpida. Una ciudad que no es camina, es descubre. Mohenjo-Daro, the enigma of the Indus Valley. On the margins of what is now Pakistan, where the slow, earthy waters of the Indus River meander through fertile plains, lies an ancient city that puzzles as much as it fascinates. Its very name, Mohenjo-Daro, meaning Mound of the Dead in the local language, evokes mystery, abandonment, and a world paused in time. But beneath its dusty surface lies one of the most advanced and least understood civilizations of antiquity. A city born not of conquest or heroic myth, but of design, reason, and the quiet will to live in balance. Mohenjo-Daro was a chief urban center of the Indus Valley civilization, which flourished between the years 2600 and 1900 before our era, alongside the great kingdoms of Egypt and Mesopotamia. Yet unlike those realms, which left behind monumental pyramids, palaces, and ziggurats, the people of the Indus have bequeathed us something even more astonishing. A fully planned metropolis that would not be out of place today. Straight avenues laid out at right angles, underground drains carrying away waste, homes built from uniformly fired bricks, private wells and individual bathing chambers, sophisticated drainage systems that protected every house. Mohenjo-Daro was conceived with functionality, hygiene, and order in mind, concepts that were only beginning to take shape in human imagination. What astonishes most is not just what the city possessed, but what it deliberately omitted. There are no evidence of grand temples or royal palaces, no fortified citadels, no statues of kings extolling their victories, no reliefs celebrating wars, no carved stone announcements of autocratic power. Instead, every trace suggests a complex but remarkably egalitarian society, more horizontal and community-oriented than many of its contemporaries, focused on collective well-being rather than the immortal glory of rulers. Then, as quietly as it rose, Mohenjo-Daro vanished. There is no sign of violent destruction, no charred remains of buildings, no mass graves, nor is there evidence of foreign invasion or genocide. The city seems to have been abandoned incrementally, as if its people walked away one morning. No cry, only a sigh. That tranquil disappearance deepens the mystery. Did changing climate drive them away? Did the course of the Indus shift? Were water sources depleted? Or did social transformation lead them to forge a new way of life elsewhere? Scholars have proposed many theories, yet none satisfy completely. But the most persistent enigma is the city's script. The people of Mohenjo-Daro left behind a system of signs engraved on seals, tablets, pottery, and figurines, a writing we have not yet deciphered. This changes everything. Until we read their contracts, poems, and records, we face them as one watches a silent film. We perceive gestures and marvel at the scenery, but the full story remains out of reach. The Indus signs rarely exceed 5 symbols per inscription. Repeated motifs and apparent grammatical structures suggest a complex language, but without a key, no stone-bearing parallel text, we remain locked out. We do not know their name for themselves, what they believed, or what they dreamed. We interpret only their material traces, the layout of streets, the design of houses, the remains of public baths and communal granaries. All else lies behind a veil. Perhaps that veil is part of their lesson. For Mohenjo-Daro offers more than archaeological data. It proposes an alternative vision of civilization. It reminds us that power need not thunder from columns, that order does not demand pyramids, and that true greatness may lie in subtlety. Against cultures built on conquest, the divine status of kings, or territorial domination, Mohenjo-Daro suggests another story, that of a society organized to live, not to rule. That it ceased to build not out of defeat but perhaps by deliberate choice. That it chose to disappear gently rather than raise. Over the years, many hypotheses have arisen about its social structure, its refined art, such as the famous dancing girl figurine or the bearded priest in a decorated cloak, its trade with Mesopotamia, and its animal symbolism, yet all remains wrapped in delicate mist. It is as if Mohenjo-Daro invites us to listen more closely, beyond the roar of certainty, to walk today through its excavated remains, along paved courtyards, empty streets, the foundations of a monumental public bath or a large communal house, is to enter a silent dialogue. No towering pillars or hieroglyphs, no altars or royal tombs beckon. Only low, well-aligned walls testify to a deep order, a dense but eloquent silence, the silence of a city that existed not to endure in stone, but in ideas. Mohenjo-Daro is not merely an artifact of the past. It is an open question to the future. It invites us to rethink our notions of civilizational success, power, and progress. It reminds us that there are other ways to live together, to build cities, to write stories, even if those stories remain for now beyond our understanding. Perhaps, when we finally decipher its script, we will not find a list of kings or conquests, but something simpler and more profound. An ode to balance, a celebration of water and sun, of shared space. Perhaps that is its greatest legacy, proving that greatness need not clamor, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to live well. Athens, when philosophy ruled the city, perched atop a hill washed in Mediterranean light, where the marble of temples seems to glow in the late afternoon sun and cypresses frame the sky with ancient calm, stands a name that needs no introduction but demands deep reflection. Athens. Not as a postcard view or a ruin admired from afar, but as a living idea, a place where thought first took shape and the polis became, for the first time in human history, a laboratory for radical concepts such as liberty, collective responsibility, and truth. For Athens was never merely a geographical location or an administrative capital. Above all, it was a vision of the world, an almost miraculous experiment in turning public life into a shared exercise in reflection and politics into a manifestation of the human soul. In its agoras and stoa, citizens did not just trade goods or pass decrees. They asked themselves what justice truly was, where knowledge originated, and how one should live a dignified life. In that city of straight columns and spiraling ideas, philosophy was not an academic pastime but a way of being in the world. The invention of democracy, though limited, imperfect, and marked by profound contradictions, was born in Athens as something close to poetry. The notion that power should rest not with gods or aristocratic bloodlines but with citizens endowed with voice and vote transformed politics forever. For the first time, free men gathered in assembly to deliberate the future of their city, to legislate on their own fate, and to exercise both the right and the duty to speak, to dissent, and to build together something that belonged to no single individual. It was not a modern democracy, of course. Women, slaves, and resident foreigners were excluded. Yet within its imperfections sprouted a powerful seed, the idea of shared power, the seed of consensus as a horizon. And yet Athens was far from a utopia. The same city that gave the world Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Pericles, and Phidias also became an imperial power capable of subjugating other Greek polis, imposing tribute, and crushing revolts with ruthless force. The Delian League, originally formed as a defensive alliance against the Persians, ended up a tool by which Athens wove a maritime empire sustained equally by diplomacy and by threat. This duality, the cradle of free thought that practices domination, must not be reduced to simple contradiction but understood as a core element of its complexity. In Athens, the tension between ideal and practice was constant, and from that tension arose some of the deepest works of Western thought. Socrates walked barefoot through the city streets, questioning citizens, challenging assumptions, revealing that behind every apparent truth lay a shadow. He was condemned to death by his fellow Athenians, accused of corrupting youth and denying the city's gods. Yet his death was not an end but the beginning of a new way to conceive of virtue, duty, and critical thinking. Plato, his disciple, responded to that verdict with a monumental work that still shapes our political imagination, the Republic. It was more than a critique of Athenian democracy, it was a meditation on power, knowledge, and the ideal order. Aristotle, in turn, challenged his teacher with a more empirical, down-to-earth approach and gifted us categories we still use to understand being, ethics, and logic. Within the walls of the academy and the lyceum, education became more than the transmission of facts. It became the sculpting of character and the shaping of the soul with words. Athens reached its zenith between the 5th and 4th centuries before our era, in what rightfully is called its golden age. It was a brief era in terms of years but eternal in its echoes. In less than a century, the tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides appeared. The orations of Demosthenes rang out. The sculptures of Praxiteles emerged. Euclid laid down the foundations of geometry. Theater, history, rhetoric, and ethics all flourished. All of this in a city of modest size, lacking the gold to build lasting empires, but richer than any in the most precious treasure of all, the freedom to imagine. But like every intense light, Athens eventually burned out. The Peloponnesian War pitted it against Sparta, and after decades of attrition, plague, and political missteps, the city fell. Democracy gave way to oligarchies, was restored, then dismantled again. Alexander the Great, taught by Aristotle, would carry Greek culture far beyond the Aegean. But it was no longer Athens that ruled the world, but its shadow. The critical spirit, the thirst for knowledge, the love of discourse traveled with him. But the city itself began its slow descent into memory. And yet Athens did not die. Some cities fade physically yet endure as ideas. The legacy of Athens is not in its ruins, though the Parthenon still defies time with dignified decay, but in the way we think, in the words we use to speak of politics, ethics, and truth, in how we discuss, read, doubt, and dream of a fairer society. Whenever someone asks, what is justice? What is truth? Or how ought we live? Athens rises again, not as stone, but as thought. Athens was the city where philosophy walked side by side with power, sometimes as guide, sometimes as critic, sometimes as victim. That tension is not a flaw but a sign of life. Where there is no conflict between ideal and reality, there is no history. In Athens, that conflict was both painful and luminous. For there, for the first time, thought dared to govern, and even when it did not always succeed, it taught us that to live is also to think, and that thinking together may be the most political act of all. Carthage, the power Rome could not ignore. On the northern coast of Africa, caressed by the warm waters of the Mediterranean and sheltered by the rocky outline of the Gulf of Tunis, there rose a city that defied not only Rome's power but also its own fate of oblivion. Carthage, founded by Phoenician mariners, became for centuries a symbol of human ingenuity applied to the sea, to trade, to diplomacy, and yes, to war. A city born not of iron or legions, but of rudder and sail, of the language of exchange, of pax, of cunning. Yet its end was ash, fire, salt, ruin, and imposed silence. Carthage began as a colony, daughter of Tyre, the mother city of tireless navigators renowned for dyeing cloth purple and charting invisible sea routes. Tradition holds that Queen Dido founded it in the 9th century before our era, and from its very first moment it gazed toward the horizon. The Carthaginians inherited Phoenician talent for commerce and seamanship and, with that legacy, wove a maritime empire stretching across almost the entire western Mediterranean. Sicily, Sardinia, southern Iberian Peninsula, the Balearic Islands, and far beyond. Unlike other ancient powers fixated on territorial conquest, Carthage pursued sea routes, ports, and those nodes where the world touched through goods. That carefully woven trade network made Carthage rich, cosmopolitan, and dynamic. Its culture blended Phoenician, African, Greek, and local elements. Languages, gods, and customs coexisted in its streets. Temples to ancestral deities such as Baal and Tanit stood alongside bustling thoroughfares, and its double harbor, one military, one commercial, was a masterpiece of nautical engineering. No center in the Mediterranean was more active, more influential, more strategic. So Rome dreaded it even before fully understanding it. What followed were 3 wars that shaped the destiny of 2 worlds. The Punic Wars, so called from the Latin punici for the Carthaginians, were more than military clashes. They were civilization duels. In the first, Rome wrested control of Sicily from Carthage. In the second, the unthinkable happened. A Carthaginian general, Hannibal Barca, crossed the Alps with a war-trained army that included elephants and, in one of history's most audacious campaigns, brought the fight to the very heart of Italy. Hannibal became, and remains, the most potent symbol of Carthaginian resolve. A brilliant strategist, a feared and respected enemy, a man driven by a vow to punish Rome for his people's honor. For years he kept the Roman Republic in suspense, routing its legions again and again. At Cannae, he dealt Rome one of its greatest defeats. Yet his genius was not enough. Rome endured, adapted, and counterattacked. The Third Punic War was the final act, a death sentence carried out not out of strategic necessity but wounded pride. In the year 146 before our era, Rome destroyed Carthage. It did more than conquer. It razed the city, reduced it to ashes, erased it stone by stone, and, so legend says, scattered salt over its fields to prevent anything from growing again. This was more than a military victory. It was a symbolic act of cultural extermination. Rome sought to erase not only a city but an idea, a memory, an alternative vision. The Carthaginians were subject to damnatio memoriae, the punishment of oblivion, the prescription of their name, the denial of their legacy. Yet imposed oblivion is always incomplete. Carthage survived not in its stones but in stories. It lived on in the reverent fear Romans felt at the name of Hannibal. It lived on in the legend of Dido and her tragic love for Aeneas, the Trojan hero who fled to found Rome and whom she cursed before ending her life. It lived on in the ruins that centuries later archaeologists began to unearth in awe. And above all, it survived in the proof that a city once stood capable of challenging the greatest power of antiquity, and did so with commerce, culture, clever strategy, and sheer genius. Carthage was far from perfect. Its religion has sparked controversy. Ancient and modern accounts link it to child sacrifice. Its political system was oligarchic, dominated by a few powerful families. Yet, like all ancient civilizations, it was ambiguous, contradictory, complex. Neither demon nor utopia, but human. In its humanity, it still speaks to us about the perils of arrogance, the need for tolerance, and the value of exchange over subjugation. Today, the remains of Carthage lie like a whisper amid the modern avenues of Tunis. Broken columns, buried walls, mosaics that still resist time's passing. Little remains, but what does is enough. For Carthage needs no reconstruction to endure. It is there, latent, as a reminder that true power is measured not only by armies but by what a city represents. And sometimes that is precisely what pains those who seek total dominion. Carthage was a city of merchants, yes, but also of thinkers. A city of sailors, but also of diplomats. A city that, even in its tragic end, achieved what few have, to be remembered not only for what it did but for what it dared to inspire. Rome may have won the war, but Carthage, in some profound way, still stands here. Persepolis, the gate of all peoples, where the mountains of present-day Iran rise like an eternal backdrop, on a lonely plain carved by sun and wind, once stood a city that was neither political capital nor military bastion nor defensive fortress. It was something more subtle, more symbolic, more powerful in its intent. Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire, designed to capture not only the grandeur of an empire but its very vision of the world. For Persepolis was not built to rule, but to represent. Not to conquer, but to invite. Not to close, but to serve as a door, the gate of all peoples. As proclaims the inscription still legible in stone, carved with pride and hope. Founded by Darius the Great around the year 520 before our era, Persepolis was conceived as an imperial stage set, a place for the meeting of cultures, the parade of delegations, the mutual acknowledgement beneath a sovereign who called himself King of Kings yet understood that true dominion rests not solely on force but on ceremony and respect. Every element of the city reflects this vision. Architecture that awes by its scale and precision, yet speaks a message, a philosophy of power that seeks unity without uniformity, that celebrates diversity as wealth, and that elevates protocol into art. What astonishes first in Persepolis, even in ruin, is its balance. Slender columns, broad staircases, reliefs carved down to the finest fold. None of it sprang from improvisation or mimicry. It is the product of an aesthetic synthesis drawing on Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Greek, Median, Elamite, and Babylonian influences. Persepolis does not replicate. It absorbs and transforms. And here lies a lesson beyond art. Enduring power is born of openness, of enrichment through encounter, of building by listening to every voice. The reliefs of the Apadana Palace, for example, depict no scenes of conquest or punishment. They show delegations from across the empire: Parthians, Lydians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Indians, Armenians, advancing with dignity, bearing offerings of local produce, dressed in their native garb, bringing animals and languages to the court. The stone does not shout subjugation. It whispers mutual recognition. This imperial vision legitimizes itself not by terror, but by integration. Not by enforcing submission, but by affirming presence. An empire where peoples retain identity, tongue, and faith, yet walk together under a higher order. That order, however, carried a sacred dimension. Persepolis was not merely a venue for diplomatic gatherings. It was the ritual axis of the world, a cosmic center where the king, on moments such as Nowruz, the Persian New Year, appeared before his subjects not as a tyrant, but as guarantor of harmony between heaven and earth. The ceremonies enacted there were more than political rituals. They were cosmic dramas, choreographies of time in which every gesture held meaning, and the architectural splendor served as stage for a worldview casting the ruler as mediator between mortal and divine. Yet history holds its ironies. In the year 330 before our era, Alexander the Great entered Persepolis not as guest but conqueror. His army looted the city, and during a night of wine, fire, and symbolism, set the Apadana ablaze. Some say it was vengeance for Persian ravages in Greece. Others claim it was uncontrolled rage. In any case, the outcome was the same. The jewel of a tolerant, majestic, patient empire was reduced to ashes by the fury of another empire that could not appreciate its beauty. What remained were ruins, but ruins that speak. Even broken stone remembers. Marble blackened by flames does not lose its beauty. It transforms it into echo, and that echo still resonates. For centuries, travelers, Muslims, Christians, archaeologists, curious souls, have been captivated by the blend of desolation and grandeur. In every fallen column there is a warning. In every half-erased inscription, a plea. Persepolis, like every work meant to be eternal, survived through its defeat. Today its remnants stand beneath an impassive sky, among arid hills and the weight of time. But its meaning has not vanished. Beyond its tragedy, Persepolis remains a symbol of what a civilization can build when it fears not the other, when it knows that unity is not uniformity, and that the most durable power is born of a broad embrace. It built no walls because its strength was prestige. It raised gates, not barriers. It sought recognition, not domination. Its fall at the hands of an impatient conqueror is the perfect metaphor for power that fails to grasp what it destroys. Alexander triumphed, yes, but Persepolis endures. Sometimes cities are remembered not for their battles, but for their silence, for what they sought to say beyond arms and dates. Persepolis spoke through architecture, through art, through hospitality. And that language, still engraved in shattered stone, remains audible to those who pause to listen. It did not rise to command. It rose to welcome. And in that gesture, perhaps, lies its true immortality. Angkor, the empire of water and storms. In the tropical heart of Southeast Asia, where humidity soaks the earth and trees grow with supernatural vigor, lies a city that seems more mirage than reality. One that emerges slowly from roots and moss, where stone has yielded to branches and temples blend seamlessly into the jungle as if they were never separate. That city is Angkor, the ancient capital of the Khmer Empire and one of the most astonishing testimonies to what human civilization can build and lose when it walks in parallel with nature, without fully understanding its rhythms, its warnings, or its memory. Angkor was more than a city. It was a cosmology carved in stone, a blueprint of the universe laid out in architectural form. Between the 9th and 15th centuries, in what is now Cambodia, the Khmer Empire erected an urban center unmatched in Asia, home at its height to over 500,000 people, far exceeding the populations of any contemporary European city. This was a silent power, not for lack of strength, but out of sacredness. Here, space was governed not by noise but by symbolism. Every canal, every temple, Every axis had its purpose, linking earth to sky, monsoon to soul. At the center of this cosmos stands Angkor, the largest religious monument ever constructed by humans. It is not a temple in the Western sense, a solitary building housing a single faith, but a universe in stone, a physical representation of Hindu cosmology, complete with a central Mount Meru and concentric moats evoking primordial oceans. Originally dedicated to Vishnu and later converted to Buddhism, Angkor is more than an act of devotion. It is a declaration of order, permanence, and the bond between king and eternity. In Angkor, the sovereign was not merely a temporal ruler but an incarnation of Dharma, the cosmic balance. But that balance depended on something more than stone and prayer: water. Angkor's hydraulic engineering remains among the most complex and advanced of the ancient world. Through gigantic reservoirs, known as barrages, canals, dams, and retention systems, the Khmer tamed the seasonal monsoon floods, stored water for the dry months, and transformed the city into an oasis of rice fields and fertility. Water was not just a resource but a symbol, a source of power and life. Control of water equaled control of the kingdom. For centuries, Angkor shone as a self-sufficient jewel where spirituality and engineering intertwined like the branches of its sacred trees. Yet anything built in harmony can be lost in silence. Angkor's collapse did not arrive by sword or sudden invasion but unfolded slowly, deeply, inevitably. Climate shifts, prolonged droughts followed by extreme rains, undermined its hydraulic network. Reservoirs silted up, canals ceased to flow, harvests failed. A once perfect system turned fragile and dysfunctional, and when the infrastructure broke, the city fractured from within. Internal strife, external pressures, and political transformations compounded the problem. The seat of power moved, temples were abandoned, roads fell into disuse. The jungle, patient and relentless, began its slow reclamation, root by root and branch by branch. Nature does not attack. It waits for human clamor to fade, stone to crack, pride to relent. Thus Angkor's temples were draped in vines, their corridors shrouded in shadow, their statues embraced by trunks as though to shield them from the centuries. In that act of return, Angkor grew more powerful than ever. There is no more moving image than a temple overtaken by jungle, no clearer metaphor for the human cycle than that silent struggle between the built and the living, between will and time. Angkor reminds us that every civilization, no matter how majestic, depends on fragile balances. With its environment, its memory, its faith. It teaches that high walls mean nothing if water is forgotten, and that temples aligned with the stars matter little without heating the pulse of the earth. But Angkor did not die, at least not entirely. As a city marked by the sacred, it continued to live in the devotion of those who never ceased to regard it as a living place. Buddhist monks still prayed among broken stones. Local farmers protected it, unaware they were guarding a World Heritage Site. And when 19th-century French explorers rediscovered it, Angkor was no abandoned ruin but a sleeping temple, never truly forgotten. Today, travelers come to Angkor seeking beauty, history, and spirituality, and find all that, plus something harder to name. The sensation of walking through a dream of stone and foliage, in a space where time does not hurry but breathes. Roots embrace columns as if greeting old friends. Buddha faces smile down without judgment. The air smells of moss and eternity. It is a city where silence carries ancient echoes and every crack seems to say, "Here once lay a world, and a part of it remains." Angkor was an empire of water, an empire of faith, and also an empire of storms, for the rains that nourished it also punished it. But above all, it was a mirror of the human, capable of touching the sky with its towers and of being swallowed by the jungle when it forgot to listen. Its story is not just that of a lost city but a warning and a poem about what we can create and what we can let fall. Thebes, the city of the pharaohs that defied time. On the banks of the Nile, where the river broadens as if to contemplate its own history, there echoes a city that was, in its day, the spiritual heart of an empire believing in eternity as destiny and in architecture as the language of the gods. That city is Thebes, and though its name may not resonate today as strongly as Babylon or Athens, For centuries it embodied sacred power, the mystical counterpart to Memphis, the fulcrum between Earth and the beyond. Thebes was not founded to be a capital, yet it became one. It did not arise with designs on dominion, yet it ended as the symbolic and political axis of the new kingdom of Egypt, that glorious era when Egypt's influence stretched from Nubia to the Euphrates, from desert mines to riverside temples. In Thebes there were no ostentatious palaces but stone temples meant to outlast flesh, meant to stand against time itself. Nowhere is that aspiration more evident than at Karnak. The labyrinth of colossal columns, towering obelisks, and hidden sanctuaries where pharaohs competed not for wealth but for eternity. Karnak did not spring from a single ruler's ambition or a single campaign. It is the product of centuries of ritual building, of devoted expansions, of architectural gestures created not for the living but to honor the gods in cosmic proportions. Each column of the great hypostyle hall, every hieroglyph painstakingly carved into the hardest stone, testifies to a will that transcends human scale, yet remains profoundly human in its yearning for the divine. Beside Karnak, its intimate counterpart, stands Luxor, another temple space, focused more on the solar life of the here and now, on celebrating the pharaoh as son of the sun. Between these two sanctuaries runs the Avenue of the Sphinxes, still partly walkable today, marking an invisible axis between mortal and divine, day and night, life and death. Along this path flowed the Opet festival processions, when the god statues moved from Karnak to Luxor as if the very universe were in motion. If the eastern bank of the Nile celebrated life and order, the western bank confronted death with serene fearlessness and artistic precision. There lies the Valley of the Kings, in those barren hills where earth conceals treasures, sarcophagi, amulets, names, and prayers. The great pharaohs of the New Kingdom, Thutmose, Seti, Ramses, Tutankhamun, were interred not in visible pyramids but in rock-cut tombs, lovingly decorated and sealed to preserve the soul's immortality. Not only they, but also their wives, children, and high priests found rest there. The Valley of the Queens, the Valley of the Nobles, and Deir el-Medina, the village of artisans who painted and carved eternity's visions, form not a cemetery but an inverted city, a metropolis of the dead built with the same logic as the living world, yet turned toward the other realm. Each tomb is a story, a visual poem, an attempt to ready the soul for Osiris's judgment, for the night-long journey through the Duat, for resurrection with the sun. Thebes was, then, a mirror of the Egyptian worldview in its highest expression. A dual city, of day and night, east and west, what is seen and what is intuited. It was the seat of the cult of Ammonius, the hidden god who encompassed all. It was also stage to political ambition, rebellions, restorations, and civil strife. Here ruled Hatshepsut, the queen pharaoh who defied gender and canon. Here consolidated the power of Ramses II, builder propagandist supreme. Here destiny was forged for an empire believing itself eternal. But eternity, as the Egyptians well knew, does not dwell in material form. Thebes did not escape time's passage or decline. Over centuries, power shifted northward. New dynasties favored other cities. The cult of Ammonius waned. Thebes was plundered, abandoned, forgotten. Temples filled with sand, tombs were desecrated, reliefs worn by wind and sun. Yet it did not vanish. For what is built to endure beyond life, beyond dynasty, beyond language, does not disappear, it transforms. Today Thebes lives on in Luxor, in the monumental remains still standing, in tourists walking among its columns without fully grasping their grandeur, in archaeologists yet uncovering intact tombs, papyri, mummies, fragments of history. Above all, it lives in how we understand death, time, and the sacred. It taught us that architecture can be prayer, that a city can be an altar, that silence can build. Thebes needed no vast conquests to endure. Fidelity to its vision sufficed. And that fidelity to the gods, to the solar cycle, to the human soul, enabled it to defy time, not with arrogance, but with beauty. Jerusalem, the heart of the ancient world's spiritual map. Some cities rise by military might, by strategic position, or by the scale of their marketplaces. Others, regardless of size or wealth, become the axis of a shared experience surpassing those who dwell within them. cities that transcend mere geography or history to become symbols. Among these, none carries as much spiritual weight, as many tears, prayers, names, and wounds as Jerusalem. That city of stone and dust where the world seems to fold in on itself, where the earthly bows to the eternal, and where the memory of the sacred still pulses through walls worn by centuries of faith, war, and hope. Jerusalem is neither the oldest city nor the largest nor the most prosperous. Yet few places have ever been so coveted, so revered, so invoked. From time immemorial it has been a site of meeting and conflict, of pilgrimage and conquest. It was David's city, the poet-king who united tribes under the promise of a nation consecrated to the divine. It was Solomon's dream, the first temple raised to house an invisible God without form, yet containing all. And it was the stage for pain, exile, repeated ruin. For if one quality defines Jerusalem, it is resilience. The power to rise from the ashes time and again, each destruction forging the hope of a new beginning. Three faiths love it and vie for it with equal passion. For Jews, Jerusalem is the soul's center, the place where the temple held the divine presence, where the stones of the Western Wall still echo millennia of prayers. For Christians, it is where Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected, where redemption found shape on the cross, where devout feet still trace the way of sorrows in silent tears. For Muslims, it is Al-Quds, the holy, Islam's third most sacred city, where Muhammad ascended to heaven on his night journey, and where the golden dome of the rock gleams on sacred Mount Moriah. Yet this shared city has always been a battlefield. Conquered, besieged, razed, rebuilt, Jerusalem passed through Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, Crusader, Ottoman, and British hands. Each culture left its mark, each empire sought to claim it, but Jerusalem has always resisted belonging wholly to any one power. It is not possession but presence, not conquest but veneration, interpretation, longing. It is more myth than place, more idea than city, a city whose reality struggles to contain all that is projected onto it. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple, exiled Judeans wept by the streams of Babylon and vowed to return, and they did. When Titus, the Roman general, reduced the second temple to rubble, the trauma engraved itself in Jewish memory as an open wound that still bleeds into every crevice of the wall. When crusaders seized the city with sword and blood, they thought themselves liberators of the sacred, blind to the truth that spirit cannot be freed by iron. And when Muslim sultans rose upon those ruins, they erected mosques whose very architecture still speaks of beauty, prayer, and sky. But perhaps Jerusalem's greatest revelation lies not in its military saga or monumental heritage, but in how it embodies, more than any other city, the tension between divine and human. Here faith becomes stone and frontier. Here prayer merges with cry, procession with march, incense with smoke. Every step can be either prayer or provocation. Yet for millions it remains the world's center, the invisible axis binding heaven and earth, the compass toward which countless tongues intone hopes. Jerusalem is a city of paradox. Across the centuries, it has symbolized both spiritual unity and irreconcilable division. It has inspired visions of eternal peace and witnessed ceaseless wars. Perhaps that very complexity makes it human, because the human soul is itself contradictory, yearning for the eternal while clinging to the concrete, longing to love while fearing, driven to believe yet plagued by doubt. Jerusalem, then, does not represent ideal perfection but reflects our capacity to build temples of love only to destroy them in fear, to pray in harmony yet rise against one another. And still Jerusalem endures, not by walls or governments or armies, but by dwelling in the minds and hearts of those who dream of it, remember it, weep over it, and celebrate it. It survives because each day thousands of voices in diverse tongues repeat its name in prayers seeking not dominion but redemption. Beyond politics and history, there is something in Jerusalem that summons humanity's best. The ability to imagine a place where the sacred finds daily space, where time pauses at each sunrise over the Mount of Olives, where eternity is no abstraction but a breeze carried on the golden light of dusk. Today, To walk Jerusalem's streets is to traverse overlapping centuries and open wounds, and yet promises. It is to see a rabbi swaying before the wall, a nun kneeling with rosary in hand, and beyond them a Muslim bowing toward Mecca. It is to hear three tongues praise one God. It is to touch stones held by thousands before, all trembling with the same faith. Jerusalem is not just history. It is the present and, above all, the possibility of the future. A future where differences are not threats but revelations. Where plurality is celebrated, not feared. Where the city ceases to be a battleground and becomes, at last, a shared space of the sacred. For in a world that too often divides, Jerusalem reminds us, with all its fractures, that a city still exists capable of holding both the most intimate and the most universal longings of the human soul. Rome, the city that dreamed of eternity. In the heart of a peninsula stretching into the Mediterranean, where hills cluster like a natural amphitheater and rivers wind with ancient calm, a city was born that refused to be one among many. It did more than build an empire, it aspired to outlast time itself. That city was Rome, and its history, better said, its histories, cannot be told as a simple linear narrative, for Rome was many things at once. Myth and machine, temple and forum, sword and law, stone and word. It was ambition made city and city made symbol. Everything begins with myth. According to legend, Rome was founded by Romulus, son of Mars, god of war, and suckled alongside his brother Remus by a she-wolf on the Palatine Hill. From its very origins, the city was bound up with the wild, the sacred, and the violent. That first fratricide, Romulus slaying Remus to mark the sacred boundaries of the city, set the tone for an urban experiment in which power springs from conflict but survives by rule. Rome then mastered rule as a tool of expansion. First a kingdom, then a republic, later an empire. The city adapted, reinvented itself, absorbed cultures, customs, and religions. Its true genius lay not only in legions, though they were formidable, nor only in engineers, though they built roads, aqueducts, and bridges that defied geography. Rome's lasting legacy was its power to translate force into structure, conquest into civilization, diversity into order. Roman law, its legal system, notion of citizenship, and administrative organization still pulse through the institutions of the modern world. From jurisprudence to architecture, from language to calendar, from forms of authority to forms of dissent, Rome left indelible marks far beyond its borders. It built more than walls and temples. It built a way of life, a culture that felt at once heir to gods and mistress of men. Yet so orderly a city was profoundly contradictory. Rome was senate and circus, toga and gladius, imperial eagle and chained slave. It extolled the republic even as it wove an empire, preached virtue even as it indulged excess, proclaimed the Pax Romana while crushing those who resisted its rule. Philosophy echoed in its forums even as conspiracies took root. Temples housed dozens of gods even as skeptics were persecuted. And then came one voice to reshape everything. A humble man from a province of the empire, crucified as rebel, resurrected by his followers' faith. Jesus of Nazareth did not found a church, yet Rome became the capital of Christendom. In history's grand irony, the very city that hunted Christians would adopt their faith, become the seat of Peter's successor and the spiritual center of a new era. Under Constantine, the empire embraced Christianity, and Rome began a metamorphosis. Pagan Rome, vibrant and festive, gave way to Christian Rome, solemn and ascetic. Temples to Jupiter and Mars became basilicas. Public rites turned sacred. Martyrs became saints. Emperors turned to God's servants. It was a complex transition, fraught with tension, yet profoundly symbolic. Rome now ruled by cross as well as sword. But neither faith nor law halts time's erosion. In the year 476, the last Western emperor was deposed by a barbarian leader. Though the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople endured another millennium, Western Rome sank into its long night. Invasions, economic crises, corruption, misrule all played their part. And yet the city never vanished. Sacked, yes, by Visigoths and Vandals, but always inhabited, never losing its prestige or symbolic power. Rome was not merely a city on a map, but a map itself of ideas, symbols, and aspirations. Even when it no longer ruled, it inspired. The Middle Ages revered it as mother of civilization. The Renaissance rediscovered it as ideal of beauty. Modern empires sought to inherit its aura. Napoleon, Mussolini, Hitler, Washington, all invoked Rome's spirit to legitimize themselves, to claim a lineage of greatness. Walk today through the Colosseum, the Pantheon, the ruins of the Forum, and you tread on more than stones. You walk in the memory of ambition, the footprint of a city that refused mere existence, that set itself the rules even after defeat. For Rome dreamed not only of dominion but of endurance. And in that, it succeeded. Did Rome survive? Politically, no. The empire collapsed, emperors vanished, legions disbanded. Yet its echo lives on in our language, laws, cities, symbols. Rome dreamed of eternity, and while no dream is unending, some outlive their dreamers. Rome is no longer where it stood, but it endures in who we have become. Alexandria, the dream of the infinite library. On the North African coast, where the Mediterranean caresses the sands with an ancient rhythm and the sky seems unusually near, a city was born whose very name bears a legacy of conquest but also of knowledge, synthesis, and intellectual ambition. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great in the year 331 before our era, was far more than a political project or a mere trading port. It was a declaration of the future, a metropolis that from its very layout aspired to gather under one roof all the ideas of the known world. In Alexandria, more than anywhere else in antiquity, knowledge was not a means, it was the end. From its founding, Alexandria served as a hinge between civilizations. Greek and Egyptian, East and West, the ancient and the new. It was deliberately planned not only for temples and marketplaces, but also to welcome scholars, scrolls, schools, debates, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, poetry, and politics. It embodied the dream of an empire that understood mastery of ideas to be more enduring than mastery of territories. At the heart of that dream beat the Library of Alexandria. This library was not merely a vast hall brimming with books. According to surviving accounts, it was history's boldest attempt to assemble all human wisdom in a single place. At a time when books were not commonplace but precious rolls of papyrus, each hand-copied and more valuable than any treasure. Reportedly, it held hundreds of thousands of works, collected with near-obsessive zeal. Every ship docking in the port was searched for new scrolls, which were then copied immediately and stored for posterity. Texts from Persia, India, Egypt, and Babylon were translated side by side. The aim was not to impose a single worldview, but to comprehend reality in all its complexity. Under the Ptolemies' patronage, the library grew alongside the Museion, a sister institution that brought together thinkers from every field. Euclid laid the foundations of geometry there. Archimedes redefined physics. Hipparchus charted the first precise star maps. Medicine, botany, anatomy, and philosophy blossomed in the city. The goal was not only to preserve existing knowledge but to discover the unknown. Alexandria was a place where thought was the very air one breathed, where questions ranged from the nature of the soul to the mechanics of the heart. Yet every grand dream contains its own fragility, for knowledge can be dangerous. It questions the settled order, dismantles myths, and threatens entrenched powers. In an age ruled by empires, religions, and rigid traditions, that was a risk. The library's destruction did not occur in a single blaze as legend often suggests. It did not vanish in one catastrophic fire or by a single decree. Its decline was protracted, murky, and symbolic. Perhaps Julius Caesar's soldiers accidentally set part of it alight. Perhaps later invaders plundered what remained. Perhaps it simply faded, like a dream dissolving when the world ceases to believe in it. What is certain is that its loss lives on in collective memory as an open wound, a perfect metaphor for obliterating memory, for silencing the voices of the past. When we invoke Alexandria today, we think not only of what it was, but of what it might have been. The unwritten treatises, the untransmitted insights, the ideas lost forever. That gap may be its greatest legacy. A reminder that knowledge is never guaranteed, that it can vanish, and therefore must be safeguarded like a fragile flame in the storm. Alexandria was also a city of cultural tension. of encounters and clashes, of fusion and exclusion. It was where Greek thought met Egyptian practice, where Judaism flourished in dialogue with Hellenism, and where early Christianity would later wrestle with faith and reason. Its streets witnessed debates that continue to this day. It was not a city of peace, but of ceaseless intellectual ferment. Where minds gather, silence gives way to discourse. Over time, Alexandria lost its centrality. New centers of learning arose elsewhere. Science and philosophy scattered across different ports, cloisters, and languages. Yet Alexandria's aura never faded. Even now, when we speak of a universal library, of knowledge open to all without barriers or censorship, the name Alexandria stands as both horizon and warning. For the library's destruction was not only an ancient tragedy, it is a perpetual admonition of how easily centuries of wisdom can vanish in an instant of fanaticism or neglect. That ignorance often stems not from lack of intelligence, but from political choice. And that memory, as with all that is precious, demands care, access, and resolve. Today, the city of Alexandria remains alive, its ancient lighthouse gone but its harbor open. A modern, light-filled library stands on its shore as a gesture of reconciliation with the past. Not a reconstruction, for what is lost cannot be reclaimed, but a promise. Never again to let oblivion rule. Alexandria was founded by a conqueror but dreamed by scholars. It did not seek dominion by sword, but by word. It aspired not to political power but to the power of thought. And though that dream was cut short, it continues to inspire. For though its scrolls burned, its idea endured. Tiwanaku, the empire without an army. At more than 3,800 meters above sea level, on the Andean plateau where air is as rare as it is pure and the horizon stretches to merge with the sky, stands one of pre-Columbian America's greatest enigmas, Tiwanaku. Near the sacred waters of Lake Titicaca, amid windswept plains and mountains that seem guardians of another era, sleep the ruins of a civilization that for centuries flourished without swords, without walls, without visible armies. A civilization that built its power not on war, but on reciprocity, ritual, and harmonizing with the cosmos. Tiwanaku never imposed itself by force. Unlike most ancient empires, including the mighty Tawantinsuyo that would later inherit part of its legacy, Tiwanaku left no trace of military conquest or epic battles. Its temples, its plazas, its monoliths were not dedicated to triumphing over other peoples, but to the cycle of the sun, to ancestors, to the spirits of earth and sky. Archaeology suggests this society expanded its influence across the Altiplano without resort to coercion, an exception in the ancient world that both fascinates and puzzles. The ceremonial heart of Tiwanaku, with its megalithic structures, impresses not by sheer size but by symbolic power. There stands the semi-subterranean temple, whose walls are adorned with carved stone faces that gaze from the past as eternal witnesses to collective identity. There rises the Gate of the Sun, hewn from a single block of andesite, its relief depicting the god Wiracocha surrounded by winged figures and symbols interpreted by many as a solar calendar. This is no mere work of art. It is an astronomical key, a symbolic portal between humanity and cosmic time. Tiwanaku's intimacy with the stars defined its architecture. Temples and platforms align precisely with solstices and sunrise on agriculturally and spiritually significant dates. Their constructions were neither purely functional nor decorative but incarnated the universe's order, inscribing the human into the rhythm of eternity. Every stone had its place, every orientation its purpose, every space its own energy. To walk among those silent ruins is not to wander through abandonment, but through a living testimony awaiting understanding. Yet Tiwanaku's most extraordinary legacy lies not only in ruins, but in what it suggests about an alternative civilization. Rather than concentrating power in a warrior elite, Tiwanaku's society appears to have centered on Ani, the principle of reciprocity. Communal labor, symbolic exchange, and collective organization formed social pillars. Its logic was one of balance rather than imposition, of integration rather than hierarchy. Resources were gathered not for the luxury of a few but to sustain a social fabric in which well-being was shared and prestige measured by one's capacity to redistribute, not to hoard. This model radiated far beyond Tiwanaku itself, influencing vast reaches of the Andean Plateau. Distant communities shared architectural styles, ceramic motifs, and religious beliefs, all without evidence of coercion, weapons, or defensive fortifications. Tiwanaku's authority was ritual, agricultural, and spiritual. It needed no army to conquer, because it offered another path to belonging: membership in an order where every harvest, every festival, every building reinforced invisible bonds among people, land, and time. Yet Tiwanaku, too, collapsed, not at the point of an enemy's blade, but by far subtler forces: prolonged climatic shifts, likely extended droughts followed by extreme rains, undermined its agricultural base. The intricate balance holding it together began to fracture. What did not fall to war was eroded by environment. But its influence persisted. Centuries later, the Inca mythologized Tiwanaku as their ancestral cradle. They named it the birthplace of Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, their legendary founders. Though the Inca built a centralized state with armies and strict laws, they adopted Tiwanaku's vision of cosmic order, rituals as social glue, and Ani as the principle of reciprocity. Tiwanaku was never erased by history. It was planted within it. Today, its remnants endure on Bolivia's high plains, under relentless sun and wind that never forget. Visitors find no imperial grandeur, but profound symbolism. No defensive walls but open spaces to the heavens. No carved names but anonymous faces, sacred geometries, and an architecture not designed to dazzle but to harmonize. Tiwanaku chose a different path, and that path, long forgotten, now revives urgent questions. Is a complex society possible without structural violence? Can culture thrive without rigid hierarchies, without armies, without walls? Tiwanaku offers no easy answers, but it provides a precedent, proof that there once existed, and perhaps can yet exist, civilizations founded on collaboration, ritual, and respect for the environment. That true power need not wield a sword. That greatness can be built in silence. In the end, Tiwanaku was not an empire of conquest. It was an empire of meaning, and in a world that too often forgets nuance, that may be its greatest legacy. Hattusa, the Hittite empire forgotten by history, high in the rolling hills of central Anatolia, where gentle ridges, solitary outcrops, and silent horizons stretch as far as the eye can see, rest the ruins of a city that once served as the capital of a formidable, well-organized, and much-feared empire, only to vanish from memory for millennia. That city is Hattusa, home of the Hittites, a people almost erased not only from the map but from history itself, until explorers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries stirred their legacy back to life from stone and clay. For centuries, the Hittites existed only in fragmentary references. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions mention them as formidable foes or shrewd allies. Yet beyond these scattered notes, they seem to fade from the classical narrative. The Greeks never recorded their deeds. The Romans never chronicled their reign. They lay at the margins of memory, as if they had lived in history's shadows rather than its center. And yet they flourished as equals of Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria, speaking a unique language, following a rich cosmogony, and upholding a state structure that challenges any Eurocentric view of the ancient world. Hattusa was their ritual and administrative heart, deliberately situated not on a great riverbank but atop fortified hills, protected by cliffs and an 8-kilometer ring of walls. These battlements were punctuated by monumental gateways: the Lion Gate, the Sphinx Gate, the King's Gate, each more than a mere entrance but a symbolic proclamation of cosmic order and imperial authority, carved with mythical beasts and protective inscriptions. Inside those walls, sacred and secular life fused seamlessly. Temples honored a deeply syncretic pantheon, blending Hurrite, Mesopotamian, and local Anatolian deities, while royal archives stored thousands of clay tablets inscribed in Hittite cuneiform, recording everything from treaties and laws to rituals and festivals. Palaces hosted diplomats who negotiated alliances, monitored trade, and planned military campaigns. These were not the marks of a secondary culture but of a full-blown empire engaging as equals with its contemporaries. One of the most revealing finds at Hattusa is the peace treaty between the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III, concluded after the famous battle beside the Orontes River. Inscribed in stone and copied in multiple languages on both sides, it stands as one of the earliest surviving international agreements. In it, two monarchs, brothers in diplomatic rhetoric, acknowledge mutual sovereignty, commit to mutual defense, and pledge to extradite refugees. This document not only confirms the Hittites' historic role, but also places them at the heart of ancient geopolitics, practicing a sophisticated diplomacy beyond the sword. Yet around the year 1200 before our era, the empire fell apart suddenly. Likely struck by a perfect storm of internal unrest, prolonged droughts, mass migrations, and the onslaught of the so-called sea peoples who ravaged Mediterranean shores, Hattusa's finely balanced system collapsed. The city was abandoned, its archives fell silent, and its language ceased to be written. For more than 3,000 years, the Hittites survived only in neglected references and half-remembered tales, as if they had never existed. It was not until archaeologists excavated Bogazkale early in the 20th century that Hattusa's story re-emerged. In 1906, official digs began to unearth massive walls and decipher legible cuneiform tablets. With each stone raised and inscription translated, the veil of oblivion lifted. Scholars decoded the Hittite language, an early branch of the Indo-European family, and revealed laws, myths, religious rituals, and diplomatic correspondence. Suddenly, the Hittites were no longer ghosts of a forgotten page, but authors of a fully realized civilization. How does an entire society vanish from collective memory? Partly by the accident of time, partly because more forceful narratives claimed the spotlight, and partly because historical record-keepers favored their own rulers and omitting the defeated. The Hittites were literally written out, not as punishment but as consequence of collapse. Yet their astonishing revival reminds us that oblivion need not be final, and that even the deepest silences can be broken when someone chooses to listen to the Earth's buried witness. Today, Hattusa is not a flashy tourist attraction but a profound archaeological treasure. For those who know how to read its stones, every broken block is testimony to a culture that once rose, thrived, and then quietly slipped from view. The Hittites were no footnote. They were architects of a chapter in human history that we are only beginning to comprehend. Teotihuacán, the city of the forgotten gods. On the vast central highland of what is now Mexico, beneath a sky that seems to have witnessed more than it will ever reveal, lies a silent, colossal city, laid out with such precision that its avenues and pyramids endure as if awaiting the return of those who built them. This city is Teotihuacán, so monumental, so unique, so inexplicably advanced for its time that when the Mexica encountered it centuries later, they could only revere it, calling it the place where gods were made. As though only divine hands could have fashioned such a marvel of stone, symmetry, and sky. Yet Teotihuacán's greatest enigma is not its scale, nor even its age, but our ignorance of its founders, of the name they gave themselves, and of the reasons for their disappearance. We know it flourished between the 1st and the 7th century of our era, long before the Mexica appeared or the Maya built their great cities. We know it was a metropolis housing more than 100,000 inhabitants, one of the largest urban centers in the world at that time. We know it served as a commercial, political, ritual, and cultural hub influencing all of Mesoamerica. But beyond these fragmentary facts, Teotihuacán's true identity remains wrapped in a veil of silence. To walk along the Avenue of the Dead, the sacred boulevard stretching over 2 kilometers that defines the city, is to step into a living ceremonial landscape. On either side stand platforms, residential compounds, and structures whose exact functions archaeologists still debate. Yet it is the 2 great pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, that dominate the skyline like artificial mountains aligned with the heavens, stairways inviting humankind to ascend toward the divine. The Pyramid of the Sun, the largest of the 2, impresses not only by its sheer volume but by its cosmic placement. Built in precise relation to the sun's path, it embodies a connection that is more than astronomical. It is deeply spiritual. In Teotihuacán, urban planning was never merely functional. Every alignment, every axis, every orientation carried symbolic weight. The city was conceived as a terrestrial microcosm of celestial order. It was not a simple geometric grid but a choreographed urban stage in which humanity moved in harmony with the cosmos. Plazas became mirrors of the sky, temples, gateways, buildings, living calendars. This way of inhabiting space reveals more about the civilization that built it than any written record ever could. Indeed, one of Teotihuacan's greatest mysteries is the absence of a developed writing system, at least none that has been identified. Unlike the Maya or the Zapotec, who left behind complex texts and glyphs narrating genealogies, conquests, and calendars, Teotihuacan offers symbols but no clear script. We find rich iconography, masks, murals, reliefs, but no alphabet, no explicit narrative. It is as if the city entrusted its history solely to stone, to silence, and to the future interpreter. What we do know is that Teotihuacan's influence radiated throughout Mesoamerica. Artifacts made in its workshops, jade, obsidian tools, polychrome pottery, artistic styles, have been unearthed in distant regions. Entire delegations from neighboring cultures traveled to pay homage, to learn, to take part in its ceremonies. Yet despite its central role, the city was abandoned without clear explanation. By the 7th century, a slow decline set in, marked by fires, looting, and the gradual desertion of its major structures. Was it internal political turmoil? A popular uprising against a ruling priestly class? Ecological collapse? A shift in trade routes? Each theory has its proponents, but none wholly satisfies. The truth is that Teotihuacan was not overrun by external enemies but collapsed from within, as though it had burnt through its own core like a dying star. And after that implosion came silence. When the Mexica arrived centuries later, they found the pyramids overgrown yet still awe-inspiring. They knew not who had raised them, but they sensed their sanctity. They wove Teotihuacan into their own cosmology, reactivated its ceremonial spaces, reinvented its stories, but never claimed its creation. For even they, who built Tenochtitlan upon the lake as a new wonder, understood that Teotihuacan was another order of magnitude, ancient, vast, unfathomable, something to be honored, not explained. Today Teotihuacan endures north of Mexico City, resisting not only the passage of time but the temptation to be fully understood. Millions visit each year, climb its worn steps, study its geometry, and feel something they cannot name. For Teotihuacan moves us not only by what it reveals, but by what it conceals. It speaks volumes without telling its whole story, guards its secrets without locking them away, and remains an open question etched in volcanic stone. Perhaps therein lies its deepest power. In a world obsessed with certainties, with naming, with archiving, Teotihuacan reminds us of the value of mystery. It teaches that not everything must be solved, that some memories are meant to be heard in wonder, not in certainty, that sometimes true divinity speaks in silence. Thus Teotihuacan stands, no mere ruin, but a city suspended between earth and sky, between what was and what might have been. A place where time does not march forward, but spirals, like the celestial cycles its priests may have worshipped wordlessly, yet with a devotion that still resonates in the breeze across its plazas. Jericho, the oldest city in the world. In a quiet corner of the Jordan Valley, just a few kilometers from the Dead Sea and far below sea level, lies a city that defies not only time but our very understanding of history's flow. Its name is Jericho, and although today its ruins may seem modest compared to the soaring columns of Rome or the pyramids of Egypt, its true power lies in the essential. It is the oldest continuously inhabited city on Earth. In its sleeping stones are condensed more than 10,000 years of human presence, as though the ground itself refuses to forget. To speak of Jericho is to speak of origins, of the moment when humankind ceased to be nomadic wanderers and chose to settle, to tame, to build. The archaeological remains at Tel Es Sultan date back more than 9,000 years before our era, long predating the first Mesopotamian cities or the dawn of Egyptian civilization. There, amid a dry yet fertile landscape beside a generous spring, urban history began. A village that grew, encircled itself with walls, erected defensive towers, and gradually became a city. And not just any wall. The earliest fortifications of Jericho, a stone wall and a tower nearly 9 meters tall, are the oldest known examples of military architecture in the world. This was not yet a state or a kingdom, but already a consciousness of permanence, defense, and collective structure. In other words, the very idea of the city took root, a human project assuming durability and marking the boundary between inside and outside. Yet Jericho did not remain fixed at that first moment. It became a city of many layers, literally. Over millennia, it was destroyed and rebuilt time and again. Each generation constructed atop the ruins of its predecessor, creating an artificial mound, or tell, where history does not flow linearly but accumulates like sedimented memory. Archaeologists excavating Jericho have uncovered a kind of urban palimpsest. Neolithic dwellings, Bronze Age walls, Canaanite pottery shards, traces of Hellenistic and Roman occupation, all the way through to Islamic and modern periods. And woven through those layers of earth and time is the compelling biblical narrative. The story of Joshua's conquest of Jericho, as told in the book of Joshua, has captured imaginations for millennia. The Israelites circling the city walls for 7 days, the walls toppling at the blast of trumpets, the city delivered by divine command. It remains one of the most dramatic episodes of the Old Testament, depicted endlessly in art, music, and sermons. Yet archaeology, always more nuanced than legend, offers a more complex picture. The strata corresponding to the biblical period do indeed show signs of destruction, but also phases of abandonment, rebuilding, and non-military habitation. Some scholars argue that at Joshua's time, the city was already partially deserted, suggesting the biblical account may be theological reconstruction rather than strict history. Others maintain chronological correlations that allow for a genuine conquest. The truth is that in Jericho, two narratives intertwine: the story written by archaeological facts and the story told by faith. These narratives do not cancel each other out. They enrich one another, showing that Jericho is not just a place but an idea continually reinterpreted, reimagined, and rebuilt over 10,000 years. It is the city that never stops being reborn, surviving not because its stones are invulnerable, but because its place in the human mind is irreplaceable. To believers, it symbolizes promise fulfilled, miracle, and divine justice. To historians, it is a jewel tracing the evolution of urban life from its dawn. To all, it stands as witness to what it means to endure. And to endure is more than to exist. It is to adapt, to transform, to outlast oblivion. Jericho has seen empires pass, religions shift, languages change, customs ebb and flow. It has been Canaanite, Israelite, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Arab. Its name, its tongue, its faith have changed, yet it never lost its inhabitants. Even today, Jericho is a living city with markets, schools, mosques, and churches, where people rise each morning unaware that they tread upon one of the longest continuous threads in human history. That, perhaps, is what makes Jericho so exceptional. It was built to live, not to impress, not to conquer, not to control an empire. It was built for life, and that simple vocation has made it eternal. When one pauses before the ruins of its Neolithic tower or walks among the foundations of its ancient adobe homes, one does not see mere stones, but the will of countless generations who chose to stay, who invested in collective life, shared labor, and the future. In that humble yet powerful gesture, Jericho becomes more than a city. It becomes a symbol of humanity. In a world that celebrates the new, the fast, the ephemeral, Jericho reminds us of the value of the constant, of that which endures without shouting, of what falls and rises again, of what needs no assertion because it simply is. And perhaps that is why, after 10,000 years, it still stands there, beneath the same sun, beside the same spring, as if time itself has learned to flow around it rather than erode it away. Machu Picchu, the sanctuary that escaped conquest. High in the Peruvian Andes, where clouds entwine with the mountain peaks and the air becomes sacred by its very rarity, lies a city that for centuries remained silent, suspended between earth and sky, hidden in lush vegetation like a well-kept secret. That city is Machu Picchu, and its power does not rest merely in walls of perfectly fitted stone, terraces that defy the abyss, or its architectural and archaeological value. Its true power is subtler and deeper, in its capacity to have escaped time, destruction, and the obliteration imposed by others. Machu Picchu was an Inca city, yes, but unlike any other. It was never an administrative capital, a military center, or an economic hub. It was a sanctuary, a sacred precinct likely reserved for the religious elite and spiritual contemplation. It was no accident that it was placed where it stands. Every line of its layout, every stone, every orientation responds not only to practical logic, but to cosmic design. For the Incas, the realms of humanity, the stars, and the natural world were inseparable. Machu Picchu was conceived as a perfect intersection of the three: sky, earth, and underworld. The setting says it all. Perched at more than 2,400 meters of elevation, between the summits of Machu Picchu and Huayna Picchu, the city overlooks the Urubamba Valley as if it floats above it. From this vantage point, the sunrise emerges through a sacred mountain pass at the solstices, and shines out again behind peaks held holy by the Incas. Its buildings were constructed not only to withstand earthquakes and to adapt to rugged terrain, but to converse with the cosmos, to frame the movements of sun, moon, and stars. Machu Picchu does not gaze outward, it gazes upward. In Machu Picchu, urban planning was never purely functional. Every alignment, every axis, every orientation carried symbolic intent. The city was mapped as a terrestrial reflection of celestial order. It was not a mere grid of streets, but an urban choreography in which human movement echoed cosmic rhythm. Its plazas served as mirrors of the sky, its temples as portals, its structures as living calendars. This mode of inhabiting space reveals far more about its builders than any lost script ever could. Remarkably, the conquerors never recorded Machu Picchu. The Spaniards never laid eyes on it, and so it was spared destruction, looting, or desecration that befell so many other Inca centers. It remained invisible, protected by jungle and by the reverence of local communities, who for generations preserved its memory under new names, through whispered legends and oral histories. Its official rediscovery in 1911 by Hiram Bingham was not a moment of true finding. Locals always knew of its existence, but it did mark its reemergence into the modern world, not as mere ruin, but as testament to a living worldview. To walk its silent lanes, to ascend its steep staircases, to pause in its open plazas, or to marvel at the Temple of the Sun or the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun, is to feel one crossing a threshold into another logic, into a realm where time is not a line but a cycle, where stones are not lifeless but inhabited by the spirit of Pachamama. In Machu Picchu, every corner seems to breathe a forgotten truth, that humanity can build without violence, can dwell without domination, can reach upward without destroying. Machu Picchu was not a city of conquest but of contemplation. It was raised not to dominate the valley, but to integrate itself into it. And that distinction changes everything. Its architecture does not battle nature. It follows, it listens, it honors. Its terraces are not merely agricultural solutions, but acts of balance. Its channels do more than carry water. They replicate the flowing of celestial rivers. Its walls are not geometric impositions, but extensions of the mountain. That harmony, hard to explain in modern terms, is perceived without needing to be fully understood. Herein lies a paradox. Machu Picchu is among the most studied archaeological sites in the world, yet remains profoundly mysterious. No complete consensus exists on its exact function, its precise dates of occupation, or the reasons for its abandonment. Was it an imperial retreat for the Inca? A center for agricultural and solar rites? A spiritual refuge? Very likely it was all of these, for the Incas saw no rigid divisions between the sacred and the everyday. A road could be an altar, a stone a calendar, a spring an oracle. It is this very mystery that sustains its permanence. Unlike countless cities destroyed by conquest, time, or greed, Machu Picchu remained hidden, as if the world respected it, as if the city itself foresaw the coming storm and chose to conceal itself, knowing its moment would come later, when modern eyes were ready not to conquer, but to listen. Today, millions visit each year, yet not all comprehend it. Some seek the perfect postcard, the trophy photograph, the proof of presence. Others, those who travel in silence, who ascend before dawn, who stand reverently before a carved stone as if greeting an ancestor, discern something deeper. They sense that Machu Picchu is not a place one reaches, but a place that receives one. It is a space not merely visited, but transformative. In a world that prizes speed, expansion, and exploitation, Machu Picchu whispers another way to inhabit time, space, and the earth. An ancient way, yes, but not obsolete. For what endures is not that which shouts loudest, but that which knows when to be still. Machu Picchu was not built to be remembered. It was built to live in harmony. And so, when all else fell, it remained. Perhaps that is why, after all, Machu Picchu is more than a city. It is a question. A temple without an altar. A prayer without words. A lesson without a teacher. It is the echo of a civilization that understood the sacred need not impose itself, but simply manifest. And Machu Picchu, even today, manifests this truth in every stone, every cloud, every step attuned to listen to the history that still has much to say. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the cities that were once the center of the world. If any of them surprised you, moved you, or left you thinking, I'd love to read your comment. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to keep exploring the great mysteries of the past with me. Sleep well, and may your dreams carry you far tonight, perhaps to an ancient city still waiting to be remembered.